hire their next city manager. We know these will be big shoes to fill. I can't remember the exact data, but I think there have been 4 or 5 managers in the last like 40 or 50 years in Winston-Salem. So this is quite a significant position to fill. Let me just tell you briefly about us. We are located in Durham, North Carolina. We're the only local government search firm that's established in North Carolina. We've been operating for about 30 years. And we have a team that's made up mostly of folks that have worked as managers in North Carolina that work on our team. We are a team, an organization that is primarily female-owned, and we're a diverse organization in terms of race and age. And we also are diverse in that some of us are retired academicians and some of us are retired practitioners. I'm a little bit of both. I used to be an assistant city manager at one point in my career, and then I went on to teach public administration at NC State and UNC Chapel Hill. I also want to introduce my partner in this process, whose name is Janice Jackson. Janice is participating in Georgia remotely. And Janice, would you introduce yourself? Can you hear us, Janice? Doesn't sound like she could look like she can hear us. All right. Is that something we can work out? Okay, Janice, can you hear us?
I can.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I asked if you would introduce yourself. Apparently the connection wasn't good at that point. Would you tell us, folks, a little bit about who you are?
Yes, I am Janice Allen Jackson. I'm a senior consultant with Developmental Associates. I have worked in this capacity with Developmental Associates for the past 3.5, almost 4 years. I am a former city manager. I have been city manager in Albany, Georgia. I've been administrator of the consolidated Augusta, Richmond County government in Augusta, Georgia. And I've also been an assistant county manager in Mecklenburg County. And for the last several years, I've been involved in local government consulting. Pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Janice. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes telling you about our process, and then Janice is going to be leading our questions that we're going to ask you all, and I'll explain the protocol we would like to follow. Again, keep in mind we have a hybrid process. We're in person with some folks and remote with other folks, so we want to make sure we can work that out well to give everybody an opportunity to participate. So our process is different from a traditional search process. First of all, our mission is to try to get the best information possible to the City Council to make its decision about this critical position. We do not make any decisions for the council whatsoever. Again, our job is to provide the best information. And when I describe our process, which is different than a traditional search process, you'll see how that's the case. So we recruit for about 30 days. We use a variety of methods to get in touch with candidates. Janice is reaching out to individuals that she thinks would be good candidates for the position. We also have other staff who are doing the same thing. We also publish the job on social media to get out the information in a more technologically sound way. We also use some listservs, and of course we publish the job on key professional websites. There are about 7 or 8 of those. I will not be able to recall every one of them off the top of my head, but some of the big ones are the International City Managers Association, the North Carolina League of Municipalities, the North Carolina City and County Managers Association. We recruit again for about 30 days. We then will pull together all the information we have on the candidates, and we then set up our initial meeting with the City Council, where they will review the applications, and we go through and have each of the candidates complete an application as well as submit cover letter and resume. We have them complete applications because resumes always produce different information, and we want to get the same information across the board on every candidate. And our staff goes in and assesses how well the candidates meet the criteria that have been established by the City Council. And then we meet with the council and share our feedback. We also do a Google search on any of the candidates in case there's any information in the public domain that would be important to the council. In that initial meeting, we asked them to reduce the number of candidates down to no more than 15. Those folks then go through an intensive secondary screening process that involves 2 steps by 2 different members of our team. First of all, Janice will be asking questions of all the candidates, structured interview questions, structured rating criteria, evaluating the candidates on their answers. And unlike typical interviews, which are pretty subjective, we have a predetermined rating criteria that she uses to evaluate. We have determined up front what's a good answer, what's a poor answer, what's a great answer, and we set up a rating scale on that basis for each question. While Janice is interviewing the candidates, we also have another member of our team conducting an electronic survey of all the candidates, so they have to answer some key questions, typically focusing on issues like how they've gone about accomplishing key accomplishments. After that, we then meet with the council again about 2 weeks later and share the results for those top 15 candidates and ask them to reduce the number of candidates down to no more than 5. Those folks will then go through a comprehensive skills assessment process. And let me explain a little bit of the reasoning behind that. Most councils, when they hire a city manager, the only way they evaluate candidates is A, reviewing their cover letters and resumes, interviewing them, and then checking recommendations on the candidates. We consider those methods necessary for any position, but also insufficient for such a critical position like this. And let me explain a little bit about the reasoning why. Yes, it's very important to screen candidates based on their whether they have checked all the boxes in terms of the kinds of education, experience, background, and so forth necessary for the job. That's a very useful way to screen candidates. But just because a candidate checks all the boxes in terms of their career does not mean they have the competencies to be an effective city manager. So that method by itself is not adequate to assess the candidate competencies. References are important, and background check is very important to make sure that the candidate's credit and criminal history is sound, but also to make sure that there's nothing that we don't know about the candidates that could be damaging in some way. But it's also not a very good way to evaluate candidate competencies for a position, because one of the problems is a lot of folks are unwilling to give an in-depth reference on a candidate. And in many cases, they're only willing to say, I work with this candidate from this date to this date, and not share anything further. So it's a very difficult way to get much depth about a candidate. So most organizations then rely on an interview to evaluate the candidates. Most councils do that. The problem with an interview is it is a test, and any test you use to evaluate a complex position like this has limitations. What you can learn from an interview are 3 things. When the candidate answers questions, you can observe their oral communication skills. You can also ask them questions about what they know. So you can ask them questions about budgeting or planning or human resource management, find out what they know. And a third competency you can assess in an interview is if you use behavioral-based questions, you would ask them questions like, tell us about the most challenging supervisory situation you've ever had, or hypothetical questions like, let's suppose you're having issues with a department director, how would you go about dealing with his or her performance? When the candidate answers those questions, you can learn about their judgment or critical thinking skills. You learn about their oral communication. You learn about their job knowledge. After you conduct an interview, here's what you do not know about a candidate. Can they write and put together a plan of action like they would need to with the council? Just because they interviewed well and were knowledgeable does not mean they can write and put together a plan of action to that effect. And That's an important responsibility that a city manager from Winston-Salem needs to be able to have those kinds of competencies. But we won't know that at the end of an interview. Can the candidate make an effective presentation? Well, they interviewed well, and they were personable, and they seemed knowledgeable. Great. Those are baseline skills to make an effective presentation. Does not mean they have the competencies to put together, do an analysis, and deliver an effective presentation. So we don't, and that's a key competency that they have to have as a city manager for a complex city like Winston-Salem. Also, a shortcoming of interviews is they do not assess leadership skills. All you get out of a candidate is leadership talk. Every organization, every city council, every community wants a candidate who's a strong leader, but you really don't know if they're a strong leader at the end of an interview. All you know is their leadership talk. You do not know their leadership walk. So we don't know about their skill set as a leader. So we design exercises that actually are based on challenges that the next city manager in Winston-Salem would face. We've heard about issues like social equity, like housing affordability, like dealing with income distribution, like sustainability. We've heard about a number of issues like that. We would actually design the exercises to take into account some of those issues and put the candidates in situations they actually face as city manager, such as writing a memo to the council about a key topic that they would have to address, doing an analysis and making, say, a budget presentation, actually using the city budget as the basis for that presentation. Setting up what we call a coaching role play, where they're dealing directly with a department director whose performance isn't what it needs to be. And last of all, running a meeting. It could be a staff meeting, it could be a community meeting, whatever might be most appropriate. We have those exercises assessed by external assessors. Those are folks that we recruit. So, for example, we would recruit other city managers from similar jurisdictions. So, for example, we would recruit city managers from places like Greensboro, like Raleigh, like from High Point, various communities like that. We're also connected to folks in Virginia, Georgia, so forth. And we would try to recruit, for the most part, folks who are city managers in similar types of jurisdictions. And the council has expressed some interest. We need to follow up with them and make sure that this is still on their radar, to include a few community folks in that process. We train them we run a 2-day process. We train the assessors on the morning of the first day on how to carry out the process. We give them predetermined rating criteria, so when they evaluate the candidates, they know exactly what they're looking for. They don't just make up their evaluation. And after a half day of training, they begin to see the candidates. We typically have teams of 3 to 5 per exercise, so a presentation team, a coaching role play team, a written exercise team, a meeting team. They assess the candidates, and then at the end of that second day, they then go into executive session with the council and share their feedback on how the candidates performed in each of those exercises and answer questions from the council about the candidate performance. When that's all over, we supplement what we learned about the candidates who will have demonstrated in those exercises both technical capacity to do the job and emotional intelligence. Technical capacity being competencies like writing, analyzing a budget, making a presentation. Emotional intelligence competencies like problem solving, conflict resolution, and so forth with people. And we will share the results of an instrument that's been validated for employment purposes and cross-validate what we saw from their performance in the exercises with what the instrument tells us. What we're trying to do, again, is give the council the best information to make its decision. And so the combination of these methods, I told you I'm a retired academician, so there's research on board interviews is pretty dismal. What they find is most boards are only able to ascertain about 20 to 25% of the capacity of a manager to do their job. This process will get it to at least 75% accuracy. It's not perfect. There is no perfect process. But it gives the board a lot more information and a lot more depth than what they might get if they simply conducted the interviews by themselves, which again is what the vast majority of city councils do. So at that point, the council will have identified their top 2 or 3 folks. They will bring them in for final interviews. I'm not sure how they want to orchestrate that yet at this particular point, but they will bring them in, conduct their final interviews, and make their decision. We are hoping to have a new manager at least identified by early July, and obviously it'll depend on a few things like how much notice, if they're external, how much notice they would give their current organization before they would come to Winston-Salem. So that's our process, and now what we want to do is get input from you all. We will start here in the council chambers, and then as there are folks queuing up in the virtual audience, we'll engage with them as well. Our plan is to ask 4 people, one at a time, to begin speaking. And Mary was going to bring me a list of the folks that were going to speak. I don't know. Oh, there we go. We've got it. We would ask you to speak for no more than 2 minutes at a time. And there will be a couple of opportunities for you to speak. I see we have 3 speakers identified so far. And Janice will facilitate that part of the session, but let me tell you up front, we have 2 questions we're going to ask you. The first question is, we want to know what the major challenges you see facing the next city manager in Winston-Salem. That could be anything inside the organization, such as morale, technology, turnover. I know there's some of those are challenges right now in the city. It can be external challenges. It could be anything from housing to crime, communication with the citizens, anything like that is completely fair game for you to bring up. Again, we would ask you to speak for 2 minutes, no more than that, so that folks have an opportunity to participate. And Janice will kick off I'm sorry, one more thing. Once we finish with that question, we're going to come back with a second question, which is, what do you see as the most important competencies, background, experience for the manager that you would be looking for in a managerial candidate? And so we'll come back with the second round of questions about that. All right, so Janice, you want to take over and start with the first question? And our first person that I see here scheduled to speak is, I hope I pronounce this correctly, Gali Hassan, is that correct? So, sir, if you'd like to come up and speak in the microphone, and Janice, you can take over.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve, for that introduction. I did notice that in the chat, there was a comment from someone saying that they could not hear you. I hope that our technology team has seen that comment. And I also hope that you all can hear me. So I will ask.
Yes to both.
If you can't hear me, please make that known to us so we'll know if there are any issues.
But the answer is yes to both questions, Janice. We can hear you, and it's been resolved. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Great. Just wanted to make sure. I want to make sure everybody could hear everything that's been said this evening. I will repeat the first question that Steve asked, and as Steve indicated, I'll be taking notes with those responses. If there's any follow-up question that we need to ask, Steve or I may ask a follow-up question as well, just to make sure that we clearly understand the points that you're making. That question is, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing the city, both now and over the next 2 to 5 years? Those challenges can include any issues that are internal to the organization, such as succession planning, or external to the organization, such as housing, crime, sustainability, and social justice. The more details you can provide, the better that is to make sure that we understand exactly what it is that you want to convey. So I look forward to hearing from our very first person that is at the podium right now.
Hi. My name is Gali Hassan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think when we look at where we are in this city right now, with probably close to 300,000 people, And I see the biggest problem being that the city is leaving out a whole segment of the community by not allowing minority contractors to participate in the city's business, though they give the appearance that they are doing it. But I think we need a city manager that would ensure that diversity is really a true thing in Winston-Salem, because right now it's not. And the city manager that we have right now was the worst thing that ever happened to this city when it comes down to the minority community getting a fair shake in the business community. I think that if we're going to be a city that's made up of like 38% so of minorities or blacks, yet we get less than 1% of the city funds. And I think you need a city manager that can really look at this thing in a true diverse way, and not just someone who just do enough to get by or show numbers that make their point. But in reality, we are basically getting peanuts. We're almost like sharecroppers on a big farm, and it's not right. And I think as far as the administrative point of view, if it don't start with the city manager, it definitely won't go down to the rest of the staff. And then you have people doing whatever they want to do, not what the city council has said or wanted implemented. They just do things on their own. And I think that needs to change.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. You all may notice that Janice is taking notes as you all are speaking. So, all right, Matthew Myers.
Thank you. My name is Matthew Mayers, and I appreciate the chance to speak. In my view, the city of Winston-Salem has a number of different challenges that might seem like they're isolated from each other, but that are actually connected. For instance, we read about shootings in the newspaper almost every day. We have a housing affordability problem that gets talked about almost every day. We have a 19% poverty rate in the city, and we have pretty serious environmental issues going on and energy use issues. The reason that I say they seem like they're not all connected, but I believe actually are, is that if you look at the history of our city and many cities in the United States, the origin of all of these problems is common. It's that the kind of economic development that we've had over the years and the decades has been focused away from equity and away from environmental sustainability. And I believe that when we start to recognize that those two things should actually be the center of our focus, equity and environmental sustainability, that we're going to start tying together all kinds of problems that we right now talk about as if they were different things. For example, we need to help some of our poorest residents access the help that now exists both at the federal and state level to make their housing more affordable through energy efficiency. A lot of people are going to miss out on that if it is not for the city stepping in and helping people find ways to access that. We need to make sure, as Mr. Hassan was saying, that we give a fair shake to minority contractors, women-owned businesses, et cetera. And at the center of all of it, we need to make sure that everybody is thinking about how we can be environmentally sustainable, because in the end, that kind of development is not only good for our planet, for our air quality, for the future generations, but it's also good for our economic development. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jessica Rowe, and while Ms. Rowe is coming up to the podium, let me just mention to those of you all who are in the virtual audience that if you would, you need to raise your hands on the virtual platform if you'd like to speak, and then you'll need to accept the prompt to be a participant when that happens. Okay, thank you. Ms. Rowe?
Good evening. My name is Jessica. I work for an organization called the Piedmont Environmental Alliance. We are a local environmental education and advocacy nonprofit here in Winston-Salem. When it comes to the biggest challenges that I see our city facing right now, similar to Mr. Mayor's comments, I see lots of different areas that are siloed at the moment, actually connected through a need to address sustainability in our city. So that's the first comment, is I really think that a city manager that could tie together housing affordability, crime, economic development with sustainability, and who really prioritizes that could address several issues at once instead of siloing issues together apart from one another. The second thing is actually just an example from today. I just attended the General Government Committee meeting of our City Council prior to this meeting, and sustainability was something that was brought up, and one of our council members mentioned that there has been really poor communication between our sustainability department and our citizen-led sustainability committee. And I think that points to something larger happening across our communities, where there's a need for better communication between city employee and citizen boards. Because the citizen-led sustainability committee has been appointed by council as citizens who care about sustainability and have a voice to share on that issue. But if there's been poor communication between the department that runs sustainability for the city and the citizens who have been appointed to discuss that, then I think that a city manager that could help facilitate better communication would be really, really important.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Janice, do you have some folks queued up virtually?
I do not see anyone in the chat.
Okay. All right. Well, if anyone out there does want to join, just again, virtually raise your hand and we'll definitely include you. We also have one more question that we would like to ask and again, we have these three folks who have signed up to speak. And that is, what do you see as the major competencies, background, or experience that you would want to see in the next manager? So I don't know if Mr. Hassan would like to say anything about that. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Myers. Yeah. Jump in. So what are the key competencies, background, or experience you'd like to see?
Well, just a well-versed background, one that is I think the issues are not just black and white. I think there are a variety of issues that it would take a person with a very diverse background to deal with some of the issues that we have in Winston-Salem. And as she just said, we have environmental problems that are out of this world. We're dealing with some spills here in Winston-Salem that was some of the worst in North Carolina's history. And we're about to put people back on that same land that had all these environmental issues. Being one, the Cleveland Avenue homes is so close to the worst disaster in North Carolina's history that they are finding some of the problems that existed from the original site popping up at this new site. And when you're under a Brownsfield building limits, there's a whole lot of things that have to be changed. And I don't think that we are looking at it as seriously as we should. And not to mention the Weaver plant fire. I think we need some real knowledgeable people coming in here to make sure, number one, that the environment is safe. When people are getting paid to do a study, they'll tell you whatever you want to hear. But the truth is, we're getting ready to establish families back on this ground, and I'm here to tell you, it is not safe. It is not. So I want a city manager that will take these issues very seriously and not just leave it as just environmental racism and let it go. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayers, would you like to say anything further on the competencies, background?
I don't know if you're going to allow people who came in late to also.
We definitely will. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you again. I guess I have three basic things to say about that question. First, in reading over the job description or posting, I noticed that one of the key priorities, or a preference at least, was expressed for someone who would be familiar with the operations of local government in a North Carolina context. And I understand the reasoning for that. That does make a certain amount of sense. I would say, though, that that would be an excellent thing to combine with experience away from North Carolina local government context, because we need some fresh perspective as well. Maybe that would be local government context out of state. Maybe that would be in the private sector. Who knows? Something like that I think would be very valuable. A second thing that I think would be very valuable is an ability and an appetite to engage the public. With no intention to criticize our current city manager, there isn't really much engagement with the public at that level, mostly because we engage with our elected officials, and that's good too. I would guess that if you asked 1,000 people in Winston-Salem the name of the city manager currently, you'd get about 3 who knew, if you asked at random anyway. And then the last thing that I would say, which is I'd like to highlight the most, I think probably the most important and relates to my earlier comment, is that we need a visionary person who can connect the dots, somewhat along the lines of what Mr. Hassan was saying, that we need to understand that the various challenges that we're all bringing to the table are not isolated. We may have to talk about them that way sometimes in different meetings or in different projects, et cetera, but we have to understand that they're actually related, and that what we do about housing has an effect on the poverty rate and has an effect on the environmental sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. All these things are connected, and recognizing that explicitly and making that part of your thought and decision process is not something that comes to everyone naturally, and I hope our new city manager will have that capacity. Thank you.
Systems approach. Okay, good. All right. Ms. Rode, do you want to say anything further about competencies?
Indeed. I would say I'm really eager to see a city manager that sees themselves as accountable to the citizens of Winston-Salem. You know, this is not an elected position, and in elected positions, we can hold our elected officials accountable to some degree through voting. But the city manager, there's more distance. So I would love someone who kind of takes it upon themselves to see themselves as accountable to the citizens of Winston-Salem. And then I would very much agree with that systems approach of, this of multiple issues being interconnected. And then, of course, as an environmentalist, I would love to see someone who has a demonstrated track record of implementing environmental projects from, that kind of initial vision of conception to the implementation stage.
Okay, great. All right,
Thank you.
Janice, has anyone emerged virtually yet? No, I can't hear.
There is no one in the chat.
Okay, all right. Are there any other folks that would like to speak? Yes, ma'am, if you would come up to the podium and introduce yourself. We are asking 2 questions. You can respond to either one or both. What do you see as the most critical challenges facing the city that the next city manager should be addressing, both now and for the next maybe 2 to 5 years? And also, if you want to talk about the key competencies you would like to see in the position.
Yes, thank you. My name is Emily, and I've lived here my whole life. I would like very much for a very forward-thinking city manager in future development that is very green-minded and even making changes. There are so many different, I'm not qualified in that area, but I am aware, and my husband and I were talking about that. And also, it reiterates what's been said already, but to see how everything is interconnected and how one thing affects the other. So to consider sustainability with the environment, with the workforce, with social justice, just everything together, and that all that would be considered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else here who would like to say a few words? Anyone else? Yes, sir. If you would, please come up and introduce yourself and have at it.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Alex Bohannon. Could you please repeat the 2 questions? I just want to make sure I got them.
Yes, sir, I sure can. The first question is, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing the city that the next city manager should be dealing with? And that can be not only just present time, but if you look into your crystal ball, maybe the next 2 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. And then also what you see as the most critical competencies or background for this person.
Okay. So I think for the first question, specifically looking at 2 to 5 years, to say first and foremost, I would say the employee morale and engagement. The reason why is because the other things I'm going to mention as priorities and challenges aren't going to be able to be implemented in the right way unless you have a staff that is confident in the leadership of the manager, as well as happy when they come to work every single day. I think also, of course, as people have mentioned, we have lots of issues relative to just overall quality of life for the citizens here in Winston-Salem in terms of poverty, but also just living, housing, access to affordable housing, those types of things. I think, though, to address any of those issues, it's going to be important that we make sure that we have the right staff in place to be able to get that done, and that staff are equipped with the tools necessary to be able to get that done. I think when you talk about employees in need and things like that, it can be extremely easy to say compensation, but I think it's variety of that. It's not just kind of coming in and paying people more. I think the new manager will have to come in and learn the employees here and partner with the employees in the development of the kind of long-term plans and really kind of understand what we are and who we are as an entity, and then add to that, right? Contribute to, I think, already relatively good workplace culture, but make some good positive shifts in that. So I think that would probably be my answer to the first question. And the second question, relative to the qualifications, I would say it would be great to have a manager who has already been a manager previously. I think that a city this size, especially in the context of North Carolina, we have lots of people who I think we probably have a good base to draw from people who are already in place in smaller municipalities or smaller counties who have the experience of being in that chair. I think it's a difference, and maybe an assistant county or a city manager that's from a larger municipality, but just some sort of familiarity with how to run a larger municipality, that would be fantastic. I think also someone who has a good network of people to draw from. Winston-Salem is extremely unique. And so for any person in that position, I think they're going to need to be able to rely on their network to try to bounce some ideas off of the people who are in other positions. I think a person who really is a collaborator at heart, a person who is passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just in terms of a box you have to tick, but as an actual practice. Somebody who internalizes that and wants to incorporate that into every single function and facet of city government, that would be great. And then, of course, just the obvious thing of knowing best practices of management of municipalities, that would be awesome as well.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Okay.
There's quite the systems theme here. You got to start with your perspective. Is you got to start with the staff first. Makes great sense. Absolutely. Okay. Anyone else who hasn't spoken would like to share a few words? Okay. And Janice, I assume no new takers at this point?
There are none at this point.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you all so much for taking time to speak. I will just tell you, as you all were speaking, I mentioned to you all that we designed these skill-based exercises that evaluate the candidates, and this whole systems approach that you all are talking about, where one issue relates to another, relates to another, relates to another, and you have this vicious cycle if it's going down, or your positive cycle if it's going up. Really given me some food to thought, and I'm definitely going to make sure that that's significantly incorporated into how we evaluate the candidates. So that's very helpful. So thank you all. We really appreciate your ideas, your thoughts, and particularly your time and effort. And I see that Ms. Rao has a question or a statement. Yeah, come on up.
I know y'all have a survey open as well. I was just wondering, can we put our comments into that survey?
Please
as
do,
well?
yeah. Please add those to the survey as well. We'd
Great.
love to get that.
And when does that close?
I'm sorry, and I've been having trouble getting access to information. The 15th? That does sound right. I think
Okay,
so.
thank
About
you.
mid-May. Yeah.
Great,
yeah.
thank you so
Okay,
much.
so please do check that out. Thank you. And thank you for mentioning that. All right. Well, I guess we'll call this session to a close. Again, thank you all so much for your input, and you've definitely given us some food for thought. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jan.